Hello again. I wonder how much longer people are going to be able to avoid facing the fact that the world is at war. Perhaps it's because we like to accord the First and Second World War such iconic status that we are reluctant to admit to ourselves that they are no longer the only world wars. It is, of course, customary to describe the war which took place between 1914 and 1918 as being the First World War. There is a strong case for describing the Napoleonic Wars which raged between 1803 and 1815 and included military action from Moscow to the Middle East, from South Africa to Scandinavia, the Indian Ocean to the Caribbean, as the first genuinely worldwide war. That being so, we must probably describe the present crisis as either the Third or Fourth World War. In the last few days alone, there have been a number of developments which indicate that the conflict is now spiralling out of control. The confirmation that troops from North Korea are in Russia preparing to fight against Ukraine is one such. It is difficult to imagine that anybody would have believed 10 years ago that soldiers from the Far East would one day be fighting a war in Europe. Then, too, the night before last, American bombers struck Yemen. Not just any old bombers either, but the B-2, the most sophisticated stealth bomber in the world. This is the bomber which America might use if they felt it necessary to attack Iran. It will be recalled that American troops are now in Israel, manning an anti-ballistic missile battery. Meanwhile, the war in the Middle East shows no sign of dying down and has now engulfed Lebanon as well. It is a matter of time before Israel attacks Iran, which will provoke a counterattack. Less than 6 months ago, the RAF was in action bombing Yemen, and a few months before that, there were extensive bombing raids by Britain and the United States, with the operational support of Australia, Bahrain, Denmark, Canada, the Netherlands, and New Zealand. Let me just summarise the current situation. Countries from Korea in the east to Denmark in the north and New Zealand in the south are now at war, fighting thousands of miles from their own territory. This means that countries from Asia, North America, Europe, and Australasia are involved in several geopolitical struggles for resources and security. Already one crucial sea lane, the Suez Canal, is not safe to use. If the war spreads to Iran, then the Straits of Hormuz will also be out of action. I think that there are two reasons why we don't quite seem to realise that we are in the middle of a world war. The first is that there have been no formal declarations of war, such as we saw in 1914, 1939. These were handy because they told us all what was going on. Mr. Chamberlain in 1939 speaking on the wireless, telling us we were at war with Germany. Mr. Roosevelt talking the day after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 of a day of infamy. These are clear markers which indicate the transition from peace to war. We've seen nothing of the kind in recent years. The second reason that we perhaps don't notice that a world war is raging is that it's being conducted at a far slower pace than the First and Second World Wars. This more leisurely approach is similar in some way to the Napoleonic Wars which I mentioned earlier, in that we see, say, an action at sea perhaps, and then nothing happens for weeks or months before there is another battle on land. The current situation is similar to this. For example, during the Second World War, a missile bombardment of some country would have brought forth an instant retaliation, assuming that the attacked nation had aircraft and missiles of its own. That's not how things are being done now. It is more than a fortnight since the Iranians bombarded Israel with rockets, and yet there has not been a counterstrike up to now. Obviously, Israel will respond with a missile attack on Iran, but it's in no hurry to do so. This gives the present World War the appearance of being played out in slow motion. I rather suspect that things are likely to heat up a little soon, and we'll see a little more movement. The islands are advancing in Ukraine, and with the Koreans keen to test some of their weaponry in combat situations, we might see some interesting developments in that part of the world before long. In the same way, once Israel fires its missiles at Iran, the Iranians might be a little swifter off the mark with their retaliation this time. What with the death of Yahya Sinwar yesterday, who was very much their man in Gaza. But of one thing there is not the least doubt, and that is that we are now in the middle of a world war, even if we do not call it that.